I don't like to be cynical, but when I see a relatively new cast member with a rather irritating personality, I assume they don't really have long for this world. But of course, the writers of Strange New Worlds wouldn't be that predictable. Space. A continuous extension interval between planets, stars, and other objects. These are the critiques of the critic McElvoy. His continuing mission to review strange new shows, to seek out new work and new bastardizations, to boldly note what no critic has noted before. Guten Tag, welcome to another episode of Critic's Log, the antidote to Will Wheaton's Ready Room. This show, unlike that show, can be viewed for more than 30 seconds without the hope that something will blow up in your face and blind you. At least I hope so. I hope it's easier to listen to me than to Will Wheaton. If it isn't, I have failed. Not just at this, but just about everything in life. Here we are, midway through Strange New Worlds' third season, and we find ourselves with an episode that sounds like a Disney musical, Through the Lens of Time. What's it about? Well, it's initially about sexual tension between Spock and his current sort of on-off girlfriend Lan and his ex-girlfriend Christine and her new boyfriend Roger, and the simmering sexual tension between Uhura and Ortega's incredibly annoying brother, who, like his sister, is an irritant, insists on following the crew around with a camera for the Federation's centennial. Why in the 23rd century you need a human camera operator is a mystery to me, as I'm sure it is to you. After all, by the 23rd century, you've got holodecks apparently, and the ability to regenerate people's eyes, which doesn't exist in the 24th century, when Geordie LaForge can only see with the aid of a visor that interprets the electromagnetic spectrum and therefore creates visuals which are not the same as our eyes, but allow him to see in a way. Arguably in a better way, but just odd that, a century earlier the technology exists to just bioregenerate someone's eyes. All you do is you just stick a pair of goggles on them and apparently it does the job. Though not in this case for reasons that we'll come to. Irritating, isn't it? This sort of cavalier attitude to canon. It's almost like, I don't know, Strange New Worlds are set in a completely different universe.
Right.
Still, initially it's all about the romance, or rather the lack thereof. There's sexual tension in the air. In the absence of real tension, the writers want us to feel this slight tension between the characters. There's tension for Uhura because she has got this, walking hard on, chasing her, and there's tension for Chapel because her ex is there with her current boyfriend, and there's tension for Lan because she's got to do I've got to sort of humour the old girlfriend kind of thing, and that's not really her bag. Doesn't really like doing that. Doesn't really want to have to engage with Chapel. She says at the beginning of the episode, I don't want to be that woman, Let's not talk about Spock and our feelings for Spock and our unresolved feelings for Spock. Spock himself plays it very, very cool. So, Lana's an excellent dance teacher. We all know what that means. Initially, Spock doesn't want to join Corby and Chapel on their archaeological mission to a planet to find a sort of alien fountain of youth or whatever, because even though this is one of the potentially the most interesting scientific discoveries of all time, literally a game changer for not just for the human race but for any race, Spock thinks he might be emotionally compromised by being down there with Chapel, so initially opts to stay on board the Enterprise. As Spock never fucking would. I don't know about you, because I don't know you, but I assume that if you were the science officer on the USS Enterprise, and you had the opportunity to study at close range a site that quite possibly might be a laboratory that had investigated the possibility of immortality, you'd be curious enough to go along on the mission. You wouldn't say, well, this is interesting and all, but I don't really want to go down there, not if she's down there with him. This is Mr. Spock we're talking about here. The Mr. Spock. Do we really believe that he could be emotionally compromised by Chapel? But in the end, he does end up on the mission alongside Lan. Oddly, they're the only two additional members of staff available. And the reason they're there is because they uncover a much larger site, a whole temple. Or so they think. And they go in there, and then they're, shenanigans, horror shenanigans. One of their number, the new medical officer, whose name sounds awfully like Gamble, but is, I think, Gemble or Gomble or something like that. Let's call him Ensign Gamble, as in high risk. Goes down there, and we just kind of know, because he's a one-dimensional character that kind of goes, yippee, I gotta be on my first away mission, yippee. He's so earnest and chipper and full of beans. And so sort of, hey, and Mabenga's like, I'm so proud of that boy. That you just know he's gotta die, right? He has to die. But you think, is this show cruel enough to kill him? Well, this show is cruel enough. But they do it in stages. First, they blind him. Then he discovers that he can't take advantage of the newly introduced 23rd century technology to regenerate his eyes. It won't work for some reason. And that later transpires that that's because he is in fact dead, brain dead, and it later transpires that that's because he died at the point that the holy hand grenade of Antioch blew up in his face. What actually happened was an alien creature called the Vesda transposed itself from the holy hand grenade and into his brain and consciousness. In other words, parasitically took over his body. So he died, but his body lived on, and he was able to do lots of horror cliches on board the Enterprise, like talk in a funny voice and talk to people about, their most cherished memories. Because the Vesda has some sort of telepathic ability and so on. And on the planet, they learn there's a whole prison full of them, a whole colony full of them. They're all prisoners. They're all evil. A bit like the energy aliens in that Next Generation episode. the title of which is on screen now, once I've gone away and researched it. It's odd that I can't remember it, I know what it's called. I'm going to kick myself when I see it. But they take over Picard and Data and Troy. You know the one I mean. Damn. Fuck, what's it called?
Why buy just a video game from Atari or Intellivision? Invest in the wonder computer of the 1980s for under $300. The Commodore VIC-20. Unlike games, it has a real computer keyboard. With the Commodore VIC-20, the whole family can learn computing at home. Plays great games, too. Under $300, the wonder computer of the 1980s, the Commodore VIC-20. Coming soon, Commodore brings you Gorn, the wonder arcade game, and Omega Race in home versions. Commodore.
Go look it up. Power Play. Power Play. It's called Power Play. Power Play. That was its name. It was called Power Play. That was the name of the episode. Power Play. Of course. Of course it was called Power Play. Oh my God. Anyway, they ripped off Power Play. They brought that concept into Strange New Worlds. And that's fine. That's fine. But the Vesda, it transpired, were the ancient enemies of the Gorn when Batel, who is now part Gorn, remember, saw the dead Ensign Gamble. They had a fight in sickbay because they're ancient enemies. So this was also an attempt to flesh out the Gorn and suggest that not only are the Gorn horrific monsters, but so are their enemies. Imagine that. Even worse than the Gorn are the Gorn's enemies, who apparently possess you and kill you, and then use you for nefarious purposes. The ultimate sort of energy parasite. And Spock saw one of them, and they looked monstrous, and they had, kind of mouths with the long teeth and things like that. So, who knows? Maybe they're kind of the I don't know, the Romulans to the Gorn's Vulcans, or maybe that should be Remans. There was a lot going on in this episode, and it didn't really work because all of these strands didn't weave together. They didn't braid together into a strong rope. Rather, they may remain disparate threads that went off in all directions. Was it a M'Benga episode? Was it about M'Benga and his losing his protege, doing everything he could to save his protege, only to realise, finally, cruelly, heartbreakingly at the end, that he could not, and indeed he had been wasting his time because his protege had been dead from the moment he'd been back to sickbay? Was that what it was about? Sort of, but not really. Was it about Spock's unrequited love for Chapel? The flip of the dynamic in the original series, where she had unrequited love for Spock, and the sexual tension between Spock and Chapel and La'an, of all people. Emotionally dead La'an. Was it about that love triangle? Sort of, but not quite. Didn't quite get there. Was it about deepening Strange New World's awful Gorn lore by introducing this new threat, the Vesda, who we'll probably never see again? There might be room for one more episode with them, squeeze it in. With the time we've got left, who knows? Was it about that? The ancient evil, as the ridiculous Pelia called them. And by the way, if you're trying to do a very serious horror episode of anything, it's probably best not to have Carol Kane say, "It gives me the heebie-jeebies," because that kind of kills the mood. You're not supposed to be laughing, are you? You're supposed to be tense and, ooh, it's a new evil villain, which we don't hear about subsequently in any other Star Trek TV series. So, it's all three of these things, but it didn't really gel. They didn't really come together. This was, in short, an episode that could have done with a few more drafts. Is there any excuse for Strange New Worlds episodes not to be polished when there are only 10 of them produced every 2 fucking years? No. Star Trek The Next Generation Season 3 was and is, I contend to you, the simple viewer, the greatest long season of episodic television ever made. 26 great episodes, well, 25 in Transfigurations. Don't fucking write to, you know it's true, it was a bit boring. But to have a hit rate of 25 out of 26, I would suggest is almost unprecedented. And when you consider the turnaround for each episode, they're constantly working to get this stuff out. Having to rewrite and split up between the writing team, and you only have a few weeks to produce a draft, and you've only got a week to shoot it. And they still manage to produce drama and stories which are memorable 30 years later, which makes this crap look like adolescent effluent by comparison. It's shocking, isn't it, that today's Star Trek writers cannot produce episodes of that quality, because compared to their predecessors, they've got all the time in the world to do it. What they don't have, I suggest, is the intellect. Let's do anomalous readings. There are a few things in this episode that were clear to me, which have a little bit of a bearing on the show's future. The first is that Pelia, played by Carol Kane, has become completely and totally redundant, and that character should just be quietly removed from the Enterprise as soon as possible. We know she will be anyway, because her replacement, Scotty, is already there. Why wait? She's not adding anything to any of the episodes that she's in, except tonal incongruity. Time for her to go. Larn sort of ruined this episode by using lots of modern idioms. She seemed to represent the 21st century in this episode. She kept saying things like meaning and you're going to walk us through that one, and I don't think so. In other words, she was irritating and almost superfluous to requirements. One wondered what she was doing there. She didn't have any function in the story. She just seemed to be there to act incredulously whenever one of the clever characters spoke in a Star Trek-y kind of way. So perhaps, I don't know, she was Akiva Goldsman, Avatar, I don't know. The prologue of this episode was 10 minutes. 10 minutes. It's a petty thing, but I just don't like the indiscipline in the way that Strange New World episodes are structured. It really gets on my tits. I've talked about this in previous seasons, and it was true in Discovery too. I know that they don't have to have the same discipline as the show used to have when they were syndicated or on network television, but for God's sake, 10 minutes for an open? There was something about an old Star Trek episode with its cold open, Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, Act 4, Act 5 structure. That, okay, it was... It is a structure, and therefore you might say the beats become a little bit conspicuous after a while. But it forces writers not to fuck around. It forces them to cut to the quick. I'm sure that if this were a TNG episode, that set up with the couples and the temple and the ensign could have been combined into a couple of scenes and 2 minutes and done. It didn't need to take 10 minutes to set it up. 10 minutes, for God's sake. 1/6 of the whole episode to set up the episode. That's like a prologue that goes on for 50 fucking pages. Sort it out, you hacks. As I said earlier, the notion of being able to bioregenerate eyes is wholly incompatible with Star Trek canon. If it could be done a century earlier, why was Geordi blind at all in the 24th century? He would never have been blind. Just needed to put on one of M'Benga's goggles and he would have had new eyes straight away. It surely... I mean, we understand the writers of this show don't care about canon. They don't check it. They've never visited Memory Alpha online in their lives. But when one of the most famous Star Trek characters ever, a main character from the most popular Star Trek series, has a vision issue, surely that's enough, even for the laziest hack, to say, oh yeah, he couldn't see, could he? Maybe we should check it out. I wonder why. Or what visor, yeah. I better check the old Memory Alpha, just see what that was all about before we write in a line about regenerative eyes. It looks like we're going to be stuck with this love triangle with Spock, Lana and Chapel for the foreseeable future. It's awful. I hope they shut it down quickly. This isn't what Star Trek's about. We don't give a fuck. Get back to telling interesting stories each week. Or, better yet, start! So that's it. Another wasted Strange New Worlds episode. We're running out of season 3 episodes to despair at. We've still got a full season and a half to go before it's all over. And the people who write this shit are arrogant enough to actually propose that they should fill the gap in the original series of Star Trek between the start of Kirk's 5-year mission and where no man has gone before. Can you believe that arrogance? They do well to watch Star Trek Continues, the fan-made show, because that, of course, supplied a whole extra batch of original series episodes. And including a fitting finale, by the way, and that's good enough for me. Till next time, ladies and genitals, I'm Dr. McAvoy. It's not my real name. Out!